might not hear too much about, but they really have some serious punch behind them, some really good lessons for us. So we look forward to hearing Brother Jono with us tonight. Before we get into that though, we'll start by singing together hymn number 3, followed by prayer. So before we get into the talk tonight, we'll ask Brother Phil Milliken to come forward and read for us Exodus chapter 2.
Reading with you Exodus chapter 2. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived, and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags of the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs of water to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel their father, he said, How is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. And he said unto his daughters, And where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them.
Thanks for that, Brother Phil. We'll now ask Jono to come forward and give us his words. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight and for tuning in online. Tonight we're going to be looking at Moses' parents and some of the key attributes they showed that may have been reflected in the man that Moses became. But we won't just be looking at his birth parents, Amram and Jochebed. We'll also take a look at his adoptive mother, Pharaoh's daughter, and his adoptive grandfather, Pharaoh. And lastly, we'll look at his father-in-law, Jethro. So, first up, Amram and Jochebed. So we learn in Exodus 6, verse 20, that Amram married his father's sister, Jochebed. And we also learn that he lived to be 137 years old. Amram was the grandson of Levi, and Jochebed would have been the daughter of Levi. Amram means exalted people, and Jochebed means glory to Yahweh. They held hope despite the odds. They believed that God would be glorified in his exalted people, and they knew that his exalted people was Israel, Abraham's seed. And the faith of Amram and Jochebed is mentioned in Hebrews 11, even though their names aren't. In Hebrews 11, verse 23, it says, By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. This was not the faith of Moses. Not really. He was still an infant. You could read this verse as, By faith Amram and Jochebed, when they had Moses, hid him 3 months, because they saw he was a proper child. So they were a faithful couple, there's no doubt about it, but they were also very strong in their own belief. When we look at Exodus 2, the reading for tonight, when it's describing the story of Moses' birth and subsequent hiding, it's interesting to note that Jochebed does everything. If you look at the start of the chapter, it says, And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw that he was goodly, she hid him 3 months,
and she could no longer hide him, she took him and hid him in an ark, and daubed it with slime, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. So you see, it looks like she's done all the work, even though we know in Hebrews 11 that Amram definitely was part of the plan. It's interesting to note that Miriam was also the one to watch over him. And Pharaoh feared the men. He wanted all the boys put to death, but he really should have feared the women too. First, the midwives of Israel disobeyed his orders, which is said in Exodus 1. And now a mother is doing the same, and then a 7 or 8 year old girl is the one looking over the baby to make sure he's safe. And this is because Pharaoh didn't understand that anyone could be a vessel for God. It didn't just have to be a man or a physically strong person. If you have faith in God, and if you love God, you can go up against the most powerful man in the world. So we've got to think, do we have faith like Jochebed or like Miriam or the midwives? When we know that the world is doing is wrong, do we make a stand, even in a way that might seem insignificant? And with Amram, we learn that he had incredible faith, because in the story of the burning bush, in Exodus 3 verse 6, God is introducing himself to Moses, and he says, "Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. It's important to note here that it says thy father, not fathers, meaning that God knew Amram, and more importantly, Amram knew and believed in God. He had the same faith as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when Moses was born, both Amram and Jochebed would have remembered the promises made to Abram in Genesis 15, verse 13. It says, "And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. And they shall afflict them 400 years, and also that nation, whom they shall serve, will I judge. And afterward they shall come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full." Amram and Jochebed knew that the children of Israel needed help, and they knew that it was nearly time for God to come help them. But they didn't just sit there and wait and do nothing. They raised a family of faithful children, 2 of which were boys, so their very existence would have been a danger to them. They kept their faith, knowing that God would look after them. Just like now, we are waiting for the return of Christ. We know the time is near. We don't know exactly when, but we know it's soon. How are some ways we are keeping the faith and not giving in to the will of the Egyptians? In Micah, the faith of their children is recognised when it mentions the children of Israel leaving Egypt. Micah 6 verse 4, it says, "For I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed thee out of the house of servants, and I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. All 3 of their children grew to be leaders in the exodus of Egypt. Amram and Jochebed were shining examples to their children of faith and works." They believed God would save Israel from the tyranny of Egypt, and they would have told their children about it every day. And you can see the faith that Moses shows when he's leading the children of Israel out of Egypt and through the wilderness, that God knows what's best and to trust always in God. And the huge faith of Amram and Jochebed is shown when Moses was 40 and he decided to leave the Egyptian life behind. This choice came after seeing firsthand all Egypt had to offer: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And still, he chose to suffer with the children of Israel. Hebrews 11 again, in 25 to verse 27, it says, "By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of Israel than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, as seeing him who is invisible." Now this time in Hebrews 11 it really is talking about Moses, but you can tell because he's a bit older. that still it would have been the faith he would have seen from his parents growing up that was running through him. And if nothing else, this one act is what his birth parents would have spent all their time cementing into his mind when he was young, before he was taken to live in the palaces of Egypt. It was so one day he could be part of the promises made to Abraham. So even though Moses himself said that he was not the son of Pharaoh's daughter, there's no denying that she did raise him as her own. And Pharaoh's daughter was raised in an environment of hatred towards the Israelites. Yet she didn't have the cruelty of her father. I hate speculating in talks, and I've considered dropping this out a few times, and I was like, well, should I say it, should I not? But I'll leave it in here, it's just a line. I think it's possible, having Joseph so high up in the Egyptian hierarchy just a few generations earlier, and I know it says Pharaoh knew him not, but it might be possible that she knew the Israelites needed to one day return to the promised land, and she knew that the power of their God. But there's just speculation, and I didn't look into it any more than that. We don't know much about Pharaoh's daughter, but we do know that when she saw Moses in the rushes, she knew he was a Hebrew, and by keeping him, she was defying her father, and yet she showed compassion on him. In Exodus 2 verse 6 it says, "And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him, and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.'" The word compassion here means to spare or to have pity on. Another time this word is used is when David spares Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel 21. Now, I'm not saying Pharaoh's daughter was a good person or that she will be saved. The fact that Moses actually refused to be called her son probably says that she won't or wasn't. But what we do know is she was compassionate at the right time, and she spared the life of baby Moses, who is otherwise doomed. She put herself into a life-threatening situation, just looking after a male child of one of the Hebrews, but she did it anyway. And just take a second to think about this. It truly is amazing. The princess of Egypt looking after the child of a slave as if it was her own. Just 2 weeks ago on the Wednesday night class, we looked at Jehoshaphat, where Athaliah was murdering her own family instead of sharing the throne. The compassion shown by the daughter of Pharaoh is better than the compassion shown by the many kings of Israel. Now, how can we show the compassion like Pharaoh's daughter? Caring for people we think aren't really worthy of it. So in Acts 7 verse 22, we learn that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. So we'll look at a few things that Moses would have seen growing up as Egyptian royalty. Ancient Egypt was the richest country of the ancient world, and Moses, being mighty in words and deeds, would have wanted for nothing. Most people believe that Ramses II was the pharaoh at the time when Moses was living in Egypt. Ramses II is believed to be the last great king of Egypt. He had many successful military campaigns and spent a lot of time building different temples, cities and statues. Although he probably wasn't the one building them. I think that might have been the Israelites. He was such a popular king in Egypt that 9 other pharaohs named themselves after him just to show they were part of his lineage. This was Egypt at its absolute peak. Moses grew up knowing all about the many gods and rituals of Egypt. He would have seen the many temples being built and the Ramesseum, a massive burial site built for Ramses and his servants. It's featured a 17-metre tall statue of himself that's now been knocked down over time. It weighed over 1,000 tonnes. It had a great hall that was 41 metres by 31 metres. The statue itself, weighing 1,000 tonnes, is roughly the weight of 481 cars, and it is roughly as tall as the big rocking horse up in Gamaraka. So he also built, that took me a while to do that, it also built what is described as ego in stone, Abu Simbel. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's a massive temple with a statue of himself next to the other gods of Egypt, effectively making himself a god. The reason I'm bringing up the massive projects of King Ramses isn't to say how amazing is this man who had statues built of himself. It's to show how different Moses became from his adoptive grandfather. Moses is described as the meekest man on earth. And in relation to his death, in Deuteronomy 34, verse 5 and 6, it says, "So Moses, a servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day." Moses didn't want a burial like the Egyptians. He didn't want people coming to worship his dead body and to look in awe of the giant statues of himself. When it was his time, he just disappeared. But this wasn't always the case. When Moses first left the life of an Egyptian, he wanted to lead Israel, and just like his step-grandfather would have done, he was ready to take it by force. This wasn't the meek Moses that he would become. He would have been hoping Israel would have all praised him for saving him. Moses had a lot of reflecting to do on himself before he became the meekest man. And so Moses fled Egypt to meet his final parental figure. Jethro is first introduced to Moses in Exodus 2, after Moses flees Egypt. He's a priest of Midian, and he was a descendant of Abraham through Keturah being a Midianite. You find that out in Genesis 25, verse 2. And in Genesis 36, verse 10, we find he's the son of Esau and Bashimath. So he would have known the Israelites and even the promises made to Abraham. He's introduced in Exodus as Reuel. And Reuel means friend of God. This meaning is quite interesting, because while Moses' parents were very godly people, as we already know, he would have only spent a few years with them as a child. And then he had close to 40 years with the unrighteous influence of Egypt everywhere he looked. So you could argue that Jethro was the biggest influence on Moses in a spiritual capacity in his life. While it's clear he had an understanding that God would save the children of Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, his actions in verse 14 of Exodus 2, when he killed the Egyptian who was harassing the Israelite, it's clear that he understands God will save the Israelites from the Egyptians, but it's also clear to see that he doesn't yet rely on God. He doesn't think of God when he's killing the Egyptian. He looks around for any man, but he doesn't pray to God about it. He doesn't even think of God. Now Jethro, a friend of God, enters his life and is able to teach him all about God, to reteach him the promises of Abraham. And in Exodus 33, verse 11, we find that Yahweh spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. So Reuel, a friend of God, a priest of Midian, taught Moses how to be a friend of God, how to speak to God as a man speaks to his friend. And James tells us what true friendship with God is in James 4, verse 4. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship of the world is enmity with God? And whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. It's also interesting to note that Jethro is a shepherd. And in Genesis 46, verse 34, it tells us that every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. This man could not have been further from Pharaoh if he had tried. And it's because of this he was perfect to teach Moses how to be a leader of Israel, to trust in God and to lead as a shepherd and not as a tyrant. In the Bible, some of the best leaders are also shepherds: Abraham, King David, and Jesus, who is referred to as the Good Shepherd. In John 10, verse 11, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. Moses did this. He offered his life for his sheep. In Exodus 32, after the children of Israel had made a golden calf, and God wants to eliminate them and start again with Moses, Moses offers to have his life blotted out of the book of life, not just ending his life now, but also taking him out of the resurrection. He is willing to give his life for his sheep. Jethro showed Moses how to be a shepherd, and in doing so he taught him more about being a leader than 40 years of living in the Egyptian palaces. I missed that. So in his life, Moses had 5 parental figures, varying from amazing examples of faith through some of the toughest times in human history to disgusting displays of human ego and arrogance, and then all the way back to quiet shepherd leaders, showing him how to be a friend to God. Now, as we go home tonight, we can think, how can we show the faith of Amram and Jochebed? How can we have the compassion of Pharaoh's daughter? Can we try to have the meekness Pharaoh so desperately needed? And how can we be friends to God and show the quiet leadership of a shepherd? And what can we do in our lives to affect other people in the same way all these people affected Moses?
Thanks for that, Brother Jono. It's really interesting to see how many of those parental type figures that Moses had in his life, and I guess it's really a testament to his character, isn't it? That he really took those positive influences and he turned into be an absolutely amazing leader. So just a few announcements for the coming week. So these are all obviously God willing. So on Sunday, due to the school holidays, there'll be no Sunday school. Memorial meeting starts at 10:30. To exhort, we've got Brother Colin Warner. The chairman is Brother Jared Walter. The pianist is Sister Lynn Jeffress. Reader and steward 1 is Brother David Van Bergen. And there'll be no activity next Sunday night. On Wednesday night, it's a bit more of an informal night. So it's daily readings in the home. There's no specific groups being organised, so we're all encouraged to organise ourselves into groups and to meet in different people's homes, which sounds like a good opportunity. All right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Let's close our time together by singing hymn 165, followed by prayer. Our loving God, we come before you now at the end of our night together,
thankful for you and the word that you have provided for us. We know that by reading your word, we get insights into the ways that we should live our lives. And we are reminded that no matter the situation, if we turn to you, that you will hear us. Tonight we've seen the bravery and determination and faith of the parents of Moses, that despite the dangers they were presented with, they did what was right. Help us to be confident in our works for you, demonstrating some of those same qualities as Amram and Jochebed in dedicating our lives to you. Be with us as we break for our holidays and bring us back refreshed and ready for the second half of the year. We thank you for the supper that we have tonight. It's another reminder of the goodness that you show to us each and every day. Be with us as we leave tonight and help us to remember the things that we have heard. Bless our works and help us to live in a way that is pleasing to you. We ask all of these things through your Son, the Lord Jesus the Christ. Amen.